Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Caleb Creates podcast. This is where we explore ideas surrounding creativity. And today I have with me Heartbeast, also known as Benjamin Anderson.
Hey, Caleb. Thanks for having me.
Yep. And so Heartbeast, or I'm going to call him Benjamin during this podcast, he's my brother, but we've had lots of conversations about creativity. But just to kind of introduce him for those who don't know him, he runs a YouTube channel called Heartbeast, and he teaches people how to program using the Godot Engine. And he's got some courses online that you can go check out. I might leave some links in the description for that. And he's just done a lot. So he's built him and I have worked together on a couple different games and some other projects as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a game designer, he's a teacher, he's a programmer. How else would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Do pixel art
Yep.
and play too much Smash.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that we play a little bit too much Super Smash Brothers. All right, so the first question I want to ask is, so there's this idea called the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And it's something that we've talked about a lot. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the growth mindset is basically the belief that you can, through hard work and through careful methods, you can achieve your goals, you can improve, and you can get better. And the fixed mindset is basically that we are fixed. Our potential is fixed. We can't change ourselves, and we're kind of set in our path. So I've thought a lot about how, and I found the growth mindset useful in my creativity, but what do you think is the best way to deal with the fixed mindset? Because, I mean, occasionally I even find myself falling into the trap of the fixed mindset occasionally. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I think that everyone falls into the fixed mindset in different places, and I tend to find that the fixed mindset comes from a place of fear, right? It comes from a place of being worried about not measuring up, and a lot of the people who experience a fixed mindset are told from a young age that they're really good at something, right? They have some natural innate talent that makes them better than everybody else.
sort of like they
And
identify with their achievements rather than their effort.
yeah, their identity is based in how good they are at something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of a mindset comes from, like I said, a place of fear where you're worried about not living up to that identity. What if you let the people around you down? What if you mess up? Let's say you're a chess player, you get first in all these chess tournaments, and then all of a sudden you go to a chess tournament and you do poorly.
Mm-hmm.
You get 15th or whatever, and you don't do well in that chess tournament anymore. And then all of a sudden, oh no, if my identity is based on my performance, and then if doing well at tournaments is because I'm a good player, then if I do bad at a tournament, then I must be a bad player.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And that identity, you kind of attach your identity to the outcome of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So how do you overcome that? I think that's a difficult question that is pretty. It's gonna that process is gonna be more difficult depending on the situation. If you've grown up with a fixed mindset your entire life, being taught that how good you are at something is this innate talent that is inside of you that you can't change. It's going to be a lot harder to break that identity down and work
especially
past it.
especially with problems of like, because I've been thinking a lot recently about conditioning, and this is sort of like a classic psychology um, idea, but the idea that we are conditioned into certain ways of behaving, into certain ways of thinking, right? If we grew up in a household where our parents were constantly telling us one thing, then we're going to be rewarded or punished and basically conditioned into acting and thinking that way. And I've noticed that like a lot of that conditioning that I've had, good or bad, I have to deal with. And
Yeah.
so you're right in the sense that some people are going to have more maybe conditioned into a fixed mindset, maybe conditioned into thinking or fearing failure, fearing how others might perceive them more, you know. And that conditioning is hard to get past. I think maybe recognizing it is a good step forward. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's very difficult to get past that. But I like what you said, that we all deal with it in little ways, but with the growth mindset, it's just about, I think, recognizing where our fear lies and sort of confronting that fear, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, if you're worried that losing the chess tournament is going to be like this bad identity for you,
Mm-hmm.
then as you experience that, um, you can work through it. If you're afraid of making bad art, then let yourself make bad art, and let yourself experience that side that you're afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Something like recently, I've been doing a lot of piano improvisations, and I wouldn't say that they're necessarily particularly good to listen to, but they're more so exercises of allowing myself to show my work and overcome my fear of the way other people perceive my work. And the art that I've produced that way has changed in nature as a result. So you've got
So you're
some
letting
game.
yourself so
Mm-hmm,
you're letting yourself explore uh, kind of what we talked about at the start, where you're letting yourself make bad art, essentially
mm-hmm,
exploring areas of your art that you feel uncomfortable exploring, that like pushes you maybe pretty far outside your comfort zone, and and you feel like that has an effect on the other art that you make. Is that what you're saying?
yeah. Like for instance, you're working on two game projects right now. You have Tic Tac Tanks and you have Demon Lock.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting. We've talked a little bit before in our own private conversations about the different philosophies that inspired the two games. And I feel like Tic Tac Tanks came out of experimentation, it came out of prototyping, um, it came out of sort of just generating these new ideas and playing with them. And
Yeah.
where, in contrast, Demon Lock started with a joke, but
Yeah.
it has a whole different design philosophy. It was mostly built off of like replicating what had already been done with Pokemon, and then we sort of added our own twist to it afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a pretty good explanation. I mean, with Tic Tac Tanks, I did start with a base as well. which was tic-tac-toe.
True.
And then pretty radically changed tic-tac-toe. It's not anything, the game isn't anything like tic-tac-toe for the most part. But I did start with that base. And so
What made you start with tic-tac-toe? Because that's kind of, it's an interesting decision. Was it just random?
well, I'd had an idea of taking tic-tac-toe and turning it into a roguelike. And it seemed like a pretty I was doing it for a game jam. The Mrs. is game jam. Um, and it seemed like a really low scoped project. Like, oh, tic-tac-toe, that's not a big scope, you know? And that's what I was aiming for, is something really small, because I knew I was limited in the time that I had to make it. And so that was kind of the appeal behind tic-tac-toe. I'd already had this idea, I was like, what am I going to do for this game jam? And then I was looking through my previous kind of like list of ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and tic-tac-toe, the tic-tac-toe roguelike was there, and I was like, that seems like a good idea. It's small in scope. And then of course I didn't make it into a roguelike. I went a different direction with it, but that's kind of that's the process behind coming to, let's take tic-tac-toe and make something out of it, because it was so basic. Like, the game is so basic and small in scope, and that's what appealed to me about it.
Yeah, I mean I think that's really useful, because to think about as artists in general is thinking about the scope of your project. Something that happened when I first started writing my book is the scope of my book inflated to a point where I couldn't even write in it anymore, because it was so, I had this ideal in my mind of what I had to create, and every time I went to write, my my writing was so profane when compared to that ideal that I couldn't stand it.
Mm-hmm.
um and so it's really useful. This is something, I guess, um why do you think it's so useful to start small? Because the a lot of creatives maybe have this notion or this idea that they should dream big, right? And I think that, it's hard to kind of disentangle this, but I think it's good to dream big, but maybe to start small. And how do you
Yeah.
think those two things work together?
Well, a lot of this depends. That's a that's a interesting question that has a lot of stuff attached to it.
Yeah.
Because start small is subjective, right? And that's going to be different for different people. But I think that's the point. I think the point is that it is subjective. So, when Leonardo da Vinci starts small on a painting, his version of small is going to be very different from a brand new beginner who's never painted something before.
Mm-hmm.
His skill level has changed over time. He's become more and more adept as he's practiced his craft. And starting small is very different for him than it is for a beginner artist. And I think starting small is a way for us to get something in a tangible form. It's a way for us to just get something down that we can then evaluate. Because when you're comparing, like you said, the idea of your book, that large scope idea, with what you actually put down on the paper, what you actually type out, it's going to be profane.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to align with that ideal. And if we start small with kind of our expectations and understand that at first what we're going to make isn't really going to be great, it's easier for us to get something down. And so
So maybe it's more
it's
of
the
like a,
difficulty of starting, right?
yeah, and it's also, I think it is a long-term strategy, right? Because if you are consistent about your progress, even if it's small, then over the long run, you're going to achieve something great, right? Because it's going to kind of compound over time in kind of the way that in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about um, the way this incremental progress can compound over time, and the way consistency is a big deal when it comes to artists, because artists are almost by definition inconsistent. So if you can get an artist to be consistent, then they're consistent little bits of progress here and there, then they're going to maybe have a higher chance of succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and when this relating to scope again is like when you there's something kind of crushing about having a big scope, and that the way that like a large scope demotivates you when you get maybe past the low hanging fruit, and then suddenly you have to, let's say you're building a game, suddenly you have to finish this game. It takes a lot of effort. A lot of the effort is sort of towards the end of the project. Um, the the beginning is sort of just, a lot of the times it's fun. You're throwing things together. You can see the progress, but then as it gets bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder to improve and harder to work on. Um, when you don't have that consistent effort and that small scoped mindset, it would be really easy to get crushed by the monstrosity of the project. And this kind
Yeah.
um do you have something to say about that?
Well, I was thinking about how usually with a large scope, uh, the way that we look at the project is less playful, if that makes sense. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the way we perceive the idea in our head becomes more of a chore, and we feel the weight of that project. Uh, where you know it, it it might not necessarily be about the exact size of the scope as it is about the way that we perceive the project. And usually, when we make something that's really big in scope, um, that's almost like a side effect of the way that we perceive it, if
Mm.
that makes sense.
It's not
Like when,
necessarily the cause.
yeah, it's like when we idealize something in our head, it becomes less playful, and and as a side effect, we tend to overscope and make it this huge big thing because it's idealized.
This circles back to mindset again a little bit, and this is maybe not necessarily, I mean, it might be connected to fixed mindset and growth mindset, but it is a little different. Um, I think, I think in this case, we've talked about main project syndrome, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember exactly where we got this idea. Was it from Austin Kleon, Still Like an Artist, or was it something we came up with? I can't remember.
It was a little bit of both. He was in his book. He talks about how side projects often turn into really lucrative, like big ideas. Like they do really well. Like people will have their main thing they're working on, and then, oh, I just have this little side project that I'm doing on the side. And then the side project is a thing that takes off and
Mm-hmm.
does well. And he talks about, I think he briefly talks about the pressure associated with main projects. And, I can see how you would connect these things together where like a side project, you're more playful with it. The way that you view it and your approach to working on it is a lot more free form and less
Mm-hmm.
structured. And you're able to explore more, I guess. So yeah, that's where we got the idea of main project syndrome, which was kind of like the counterpoint to what Austin Kleon brought up in his book.
Yeah, it's kind of like main project mindset versus side project mindset. It would be
Mm-hmm.
another way of thinking about it. You want to have that side project mindset. Cal Newport wrote a book called Deep Work, and we've both read it. It's a great book on time management and dealing with distractions. So I use so just to briefly introduce the ideas a little bit more. So deep work is it's when you as a creator can work for long periods of time undistracted. And the idea that Cal Newport explains is that when we have more deep work, we we rapidly improve, and not only do we rapidly improve, but we can create a lot more. Right? If we're spending 2 or 3 hours of undivided attention on a project, then we get sort of exponential rewards back for doing that.
Yeah.
So my question is what makes it so hard to get into deep work? Like it's for me, it's something I continue to struggle with. I continue to struggle with attention fragmentation. Um, the internet is probably a big contributor to that. What ways have you done? What ways have you dealt with distraction?
Well, because because of my personality, uh, I tend to avoid things that are difficult in any sense of the word. Stuff that most people would consider not that difficult, I would be like, why do I have to do this? In particular, like tying shoes.
Yeah.
Even just tying my shoes is the most annoying thing. So, I love slip-on shoes. Um, and so because of that, I try to construct an environment that makes the thing that I want to do easier and the things that I don't want to do harder. And so for my office, I have my desktop set up, and I have a site blocker on my web browser that only allows me to go to specific sites that are related to work, like the Godot documentation
Mm-hmm.
or Google Drive, which is where I write. And it blocks all social media, can't go to any of those places. And I've also set up my office with a nice big table that has a bunch of paper prototyping equipment on it, so I can easily, if I'm uh, have an idea or anything, I can jump over to that table really easily, just start paper prototyping right away. So I try
Mm.
to make those things easy. Uh, when it comes to my habits for work too, I try not to be too committal with stuff. Usually, I don't give myself time, like structured time, like, oh, I have to do this for this long. It's like, oh, I just have to start doing it, and
Huh.
then I do it for as long as I want.
What
Uh,
what's the is it just that you've experimented with, cuz I use Pomodoro timers, which I basically say, okay, for 20 minutes I'm going to focus on this thing. So what's kind of your have you tried that, or does that not work for you particularly, or what's the mindset surrounding that?
I've tried that. I've done that before. I actually kept a spreadsheet at one point tracking what each, I called them ticks, like a 20-minute tick. And I
Mm-hmm.
tracked what I spent for each one. And I found myself gamifying that a little too much, where it became about the ticks and about the time. Um, and then I ended up kind of just like falling out of it. So it didn't really work for me on like a habitual, um, in a habitual way. Like I think that setting a timer for very specific things that I want to get done can be very useful, but the trying to do it every single day as a habit um, kind of monotonized it for me, and it lost the meaning that it had.
Hmm. It became more about the ticking off a checkbox than the actual work inside of the checkbox.
Yeah, and so I almost was like, well, if it's just going to become that anyways, then I might as well make it just that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
so like, okay, if I want to make a habit of working on this game every day, and I know that it's going to be just about, at some point it's going to be just about ticking off a little checkbox that I did this, then why not just make it that exactly? Why not just make it, okay, I worked on the game today and I can check off a checkbox and I don't have to time myself or anything. But then it's like, well, that wasn't very satisfying because all I did was start working on it, and I didn't actually, like, I didn't do anything after that.
Mm.
Uh, but that's okay, and some days that is okay, and sometimes some days that's what it is. Some days it's literally just getting the checkbox. Um, but most of the time, because of the fact that I don't feel any pressure associated with timing it at all, I will start doing it for the intent of just checking off the checkbox and then kind of get into it at that point where there's like no pressure after that initial, oh, I did the checkbox, then there's no pressure after that, and it kind of frees me to just work on it, and
It's
I've
sort of
already
like
started, so then it's easier.
it's sort of like when you are with your friends and they're all doing this thing that's kind of scary to you. You don't want to try it, like maybe it's a rope swing, but you get up there anyways and you kind of just push yourself past your little bit of, I guess, the pressure you're feeling, and you jump on the rope swing, and then once you're actually swinging, it's really fun and euphoric, right? But until you kind of push yourself off, you don't get into that mindset.
Yeah, I kind of use the checkbox as a way to start myself and then
Mhm.
let everything else that comes after that be what it is, which
Mhm.
is why I made a Substack post about my goal for writing. Last year I started writing every weekday, and like there was no pressure at all as to what I wrote. I could just write whatever came into my head.
Mhm.
Um, and I started doing that in January and did it throughout the whole year. And then this year, I'm doing the same thing, except that I want to write more content. So, but instead of actually timing myself, my habit is to start a timer.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's actually no pressure to finish the timer. I'm going to start a 20-minute timer when I sit down to write. And that's the habit, is starting the timer. I can stop whenever I want. But see, I'm like the checkbox is starting the timer, and then it frees myself to write for the whole 20 minutes if I want to.
Okay, okay. That's actually, I'm sort of converging on that as far as my own productivity as an artist. Because I also do daily writing, and I've been using the Pomodoro timer, which is a 20-minute timer. Um, but I've started to get to where I'll start the timer and I'll be writing, and then sometimes I'll just be like, well, that's good enough. I'll check the timer. There'll be 5 minutes left, but I sort of let go of sort of let go of the actual need to finish the timer, sort of like to force whatever I'm doing into the slot of the timer. The timer, for some reason, just it's like a way of switching my brain over to feeling like I need to be doing this task,
Mm-hmm.
rather than an actual strict measurement of my time.
Yeah, it's like trying to find the balance between being too rigid and being too loose, where you just don't ever get anything done,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And there's definitely both those things.
Yeah, and finding the balance is different for every person, and but for me, I found that I don't know, trying to make my work more playful is an interesting thing. Like I remember I used to pray about working hard, like let me work hard tomorrow. That
Mm-hmm.
was the thing in my prayer, that I can
Mm-hmm.
work hard. And then I kind of had this revelation about that, where it was where I was like, I can work hard, really hard, and do all the wrong things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 like put that pressure that's like, you know, there's kind of like this mentality uh in culture, in where it's like, like industriousness is so um valued and,
Idolized.
yeah,
Idolized.
idolized.
Yeah,
That's the word I'm
idolized.
looking for. And like obviously being industrious is I guess being industrious is maybe not the right way to put it. Being productive is good. Like it helps us to feel good when we're productive. We can help other people, and
Mm-hmm.
that helps them, and it's net positive for society, right? Productivity.
Yeah.
We obviously don't want to be idle and not ever get anything done, because that's not beneficial to us
Then
or anyone else.
we're not producing any value. So
Yeah.
it's just gonna kind of
um,
go ahead.
but industriousness, like in my prayers now, kind of the revelation that I had was um, to pray to focus on what's important.
Mm, mm. Yeah, this brings us to a very important question that I've been thinking a lot about, which is attention. Attention is like I I personally can't see anything more vital than how you spend your attention.
Yeah.
That might be, I mean, that might almost be the definition of your freedom of choice, is how do I spend my attention?
Yeah.
And so, like, instead of maybe focusing on like the common cultural idea of um grit, I think is what a lot of people say. They call it grit. Like you just need to push through and produce and just be as hardworking as you can. Basically, the idea is success is based off of working harder than everyone else. And
Yeah.
if you don't work harder than everyone else, then you're not going to be successful. And that pressure is really hard on some people because
Mm-hmm.
they feel like they might fall into the trap of comparing themselves to other people who are very industrious, and maybe they don't feel like they're quite as industrious, and they feel like that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But what they might focus on instead is I have I have this I have my ability to pay attention, and I can spend that wisely or not. And if I spend my attention, sort of like a resource, if I spend that wisely, then that is where I'm going to be the most valuable, you know.
Mm-hmm. Like sometimes choosing where you put your focus or where your attention can be the industrious thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if your job is to work building fences, then and you go into work the next day, the most benefit that you can bring in that situation is by focusing on um, working hard in the sense of, like the grit sense,
Yeah.
and building those fences,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where your focus can be most useful in that situation, right?
Sort of like the goal of, so I guess like how you spend your attention depends on what goals you have then.
Yeah, and what I don't want to use the word obligation, because I don't think that that's the right way to think about it. But what bonds um, you have connecting you to other people, you know? So if you have a work relationship um, with your boss, building fences or whatever, then
Mm-hmm.
there's a bond there that you've created. You've created that bond, that relationship, and and your focus needs to be um, somewhat determined by that bond, right? And of
Yeah.
course, you can choose to break those bonds. At some point, you could be like, well, I'm going to quit this job and I want to do something else. And that's perfectly fine, you know? But when you've committed to something like that, there's a bond there that is, that as long as you're maintaining that bond, you need to use your attention and your focus to, uh,
Facilitate the facilitate the growth and the growth and the, I guess, the productivity of that bond, because like,
and
you
the
know,
maintaining of it.
and
Yeah.
the maintenance of that bond. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so where we put our focus can be affected by other people as well, right? Uh, and that's where you get the classic movie trope of the dad that works too many hours and never spends any time with his family, right? He's working very hard, but he's
Mm-hmm.
not focusing on the right things,
Mm-hmm.
because he's ignoring the bonds and relationships that he's formed with his family uh, completely.
Yeah. And that can happen in a lot of ways as creatives. It can happen if you focus your attention too much on even just like a single project. Maybe that comes at the cost of your side projects, right? Like we talked about earlier. If you get so involved in one project, that might blind you to the potential opportunities of something else. If you are too attentive to sort of new opportunities coming along their way, then maybe you don't have the proper commitment to follow through and finish your projects, which is also a bad outcome, I would say.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
And there's two steps to this process, right? The first step is to figure out what is important to you, and then the next step is to learn to focus on it. And we're never like completely we've never quite figured out the first step completely, but we can have a pretty good idea, enough of an idea to act, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, figuring out what's important, that's like the core question at the bottom of philosophy. So, that's like that's definitely not a problem that we're going to solve in our own lifetimes, or it's
But I think
unlikely that
most
we are.
people I think most people know intuitively, to some degree, what things are important to them, right?
True.
Where it's like, if you tell relationships are generally important to most people, and that's kind of like an intuitive thing that people understand. If you
Mhm.
look at media, for example, pretty much all art, actually, you can kind of see how people intuit what's important, and that's usually a pretty good starting point.
True. And then the other aspect I wanted to pick up on is how, you can't just tell yourself that this is what's important, this is what I should focus on. So now I'm just going to do what I say. Like if I wake
Yeah.
up, it's like I wake up in the morning and I say, today I'm going to go apply for a new job. And then like 3 months later, I haven't applied for a new job. you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, so
Or the classic, I mean, we're coming up on the new year, right?
yep.
Everybody's going to be like, yeah, this year I'm going to lose 15 pounds or whatever. And
And everyone's
and
like,
then
no, you're not.
yeah, exactly. It's saying, "Oh, yeah, my health is important. I know that my health is important," is very different from actually implementing a plan and focusing on what you think is important. We tend to easily slip into stuff that we wouldn't consider important just because it's easy.
Maybe this is why ritual is such a necessary part, and this is kind of taking Atomic Habits, um, who we talked about earlier a little bit, to maybe a new level. Because we talk about habits as artists, but there's kind of a distinction between a ritual and a habit. A ritual to me is something that when you do it, it sort of helps you realize why what you're doing is important at the same time. Like um like for
So,
example, like when I wake up in the morning, um I try to start my day usually with some free writing. Just write whatever comes to my head. But I've sort of ritualized it because I I turn on my computer. I turn on this music that I kind of zone into, and I start off sort of the same way. I say hello, like good morning, which you wouldn't think would matter, right? But like I've sort of ritualized it into something. I don't know how to describe it. More significant, so it sort of tells me. It's almost like the habit is telling me that it's important.
yeah, you're signaling to yourself that it's important.
Yeah. So maybe that's one of the ways we can kind of mold ourselves more. Um, we can mold ourselves into who we want to become by ritual, making a ritual
And
surrounding habits.
I have so many thoughts on that. It's crazy. My mind is all just all over the place. Like expanded out in like 5 different directions. Uh, but like an interesting. So I'll try and start with the things that are maybe less conversational first, which is, I guess there's a director that makes the actors say their lines like while they're recording it just thousands of times over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Hmm.
And it's like I was watching a video about an actor that was talking about the process. And the first thing you'd think is, well, if you say that line so many times, isn't it going to lose all of its meaning, right?
Yeah, isn't it gonna become boring? It's gonna become trivial? You won't be able to put the emotion into it anymore.
Exactly. And the actor was saying that it was just the opposite. They're saying that like once they said it so many times, it almost freed them uh to say it intuitively without like logically thinking about it,
Huh.
which reminded me of the concept from The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin, where he talks about form to leave form,
Mm. Mm.
right? Which is where you go through the process of doing something over and over and over and over and over again until you've established a form, and then you're able to be freed from that and leave it, right? Everyone talks about understanding the rules of writing so that then you can break them.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that as being form to leave form. And so and then the next direction that my
Yeah.
mind went in
Yeah. Keep going.
was because if we're talking about signaling to ourselves that something is important, like you said, your ritual that you have around writing signals uh, the things that you do with it are almost a signal to tell you that it's important. Yes, this is important to me. Look at
Mm-hmm.
the things that I'm going through in order to do it. And so then the next thing that I jumped to was, well, what are some ways that we can signal to ourselves that something is important, right? And one of the
Yeah.
things that I thought about was attire, how we dress,
That's
right?
interesting. Yeah.
If we wake up and we're riding in our pajamas, um, then we're signaling to ourselves that this is a lot more relaxed,
This is
and
pajama worthy writing.
this is pajama worthy writing, right? And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Pajama worthy writing can be good writing too. Um, and but it's just interesting, like when you're trying to create something, uh, you can kind of use it's your environment and also your just mainly your environment, I guess, environmental engineering, in order to construct a mood and a tone that you want to set for what you're creating.
It's kind of like the symbol of it, you know? Like like with my videos, something kind of changed when I decided I was going to wear my suit jacket when I recorded it.
Uh-huh.
Um it just made it more important to me for some reason. The symbol of the suit, which is sort of a symbol of academic seriousness, you know,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
like it made me care about the videos a lot more. And I don't find myself getting as demotivated as often ever since making that choice. In fact, I'm always a little bit excited, and maybe this is just the giddy academic inside of me. I'm always a little excited to put my suit on for the video.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, playing dress up is something that children do, and they don't do it. I'm slowly turning into Dallin, our other brother,
Yeah,
when it
as
comes
we
to the
all
whole
do.
as we all do. When it comes to the whole childlike play, and like playing dress up is something that children do in order to experience a certain type of practice for certain types of situations, and that kind of play and that kind of attitude around dress, and I think it's important for that, and that kind of mentality around getting things done and work. Um, if we can find that balance where our work is still very playful, uh, but we're adult enough to focus on what's
To take it
important, right?
seriously, yeah.
To take it seriously, uh, to try and let it benefit others,
Hmm.
right? And maybe be a bit more structured in the outcomes. But I don't know. It's a hard balance because my intuition has led me more and more towards how can I make things more playful? How can I go back to the way it was, you know, when I very first started making games and I didn't have a worry in the world, and it
Hmm.
was just I did it for fun, and I spent hours and hours and hours doing it, and I didn't have to try and motivate myself, or you know, it was interesting for the sake of being interesting and fun.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this up, I think what I want to end this podcast on. I think, two questions, which is what are some book recommendations that have helped you in your business, with your family, if with your creativity? What are some what would you say were some major books that helped you with those things?
Uh, there's so many books.
So I
There's
narrow it
really so
down to
many
like
books.
3 to 5 or something.
Yeah, the hard thing too is that the teacher in me is very concerned with where somebody is in their learning journey before recommending a book to them.
Yeah, that's a it's very
Like
important observation, I think.
like prerequisites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that's the hard part for me. I think for new artists, I do think the art of learning, or not the art of learning, the artist's way. Is it Julia Cameron? I
Yeah,
think.
Julia Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah, the artist's way by Julia Cameron is a good one. Um, I'd actually recommend watching. I'd actually recommend watching the Tick Tick Boom on Netflix. I think that's a good. Uh, I would say
Story way.
converse. Yeah, like a conversation about creating art through story
Mm.
and some narration and through music, and it's really good. Uh, I also like Bonds That Make Us Free by C. Terry Warner,
Yep,
as like
that's a
a
great book.
relationship book, and it's more of a philosophical, less about creating art and more about relationships, but it's one of my favorites. Uh, I like the Still Like an Artist books.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're a little bit, I don't know, they're really easy reads and fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I would say that's one of the big things I like about Austin Kleon in general is just like his books are very concise. And
yeah,
if you can kind of read between the lines, I think, because that's kind of like, I feel like his writing style is to leave things unsaid for you to figure it out. Then
yeah.
it's a great read. Um, yeah.
I don't think I even need to recommend Atomic Habits. I'm pretty sure everybody's read that one by now.
It is a
Um,
pretty popular book.
the Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin is good. He also talks about growth mindset and fixed mindset in it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but he uses different terms. He calls it like incremental learning versus identity learning, or
Yeah, something
incremental.
like that.
I don't remember exactly how he words it. It's slightly different, but it's the same concept. So um, Peak by Robert Poole and Anders Ericsson is another great one about it touches on the topic of fixed versus growth mindset and like what it takes to become a top performer in a field, and uh
And
and
also sort of universal principles for learning, which I think that was actually for practice and learning. I think that's what I got out of that book.
yeah, yeah. Deep Work, I think this will be my last one because I've got just tons of them.
Yeah.
Deep Work is the last one that I'd recommend. Who is it by again? Cal
Cal
Newport.
Newport. Yep.
Yeah, Deep Work. It's not. The book is a little bit more. I would say it's not the most fun book to read, although to be fair, some of the other ones I suggested aren't necessarily super fun to read.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it has a lot of value in it. It's worth it. So we'll end my list with those. I'm sure I'll have a ton of other recommendations later.
Okay, my
If
final.
if I'm ever on this podcast again.
Yeah, we'll probably have a whole new set of books to recommend. So,
Oh yeah.
my last question is, why why do you try to do what you love rather than what's easy?
Why do I try to do what I love rather than what's easy? Hmm. Well, because of how I feel when I do what's easy. So there's I think that's it. I think it's just how I feel. If I do what's easy, I don't really feel very good. I'm like, this isn't a good feeling. This isn't how I want to live my life. And uh, so it's based purely on how I feel about it afterwards, my emotional state, and like, so if eating a hamburger, there's more to it, I think, than that. A little bit of it is not wanting to waste my life, right? Where it's like, but see, waste is um, subjective, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Uh, but some of it is like how long you live, right?
Yeah.
You want to live longer. If you die at 30 because you're um, you know don't take good care of your body, and you have poor health and you die super early, then I think most people would consider that a waste.
Yeah.
um maybe some people don't. Maybe some people are like, yeah, my calling in life is to uh just eat a bunch of junk food and then have a heart attack and die, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like that makes them happy. uh but I have a hard time believing that. I say that and I don't believe it, right? I don't believe that there's anyone like that when I say it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of wanting to prolong life, right? Because intuitively that feels like the right thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
and then recognizing how I feel when I do things that are easy, that uh or when I do them too much. I think it's okay to enjoy life here and there,
For
and
sure.
go get your fast food and eat it because it tastes good and enjoy it. But there's a balance there, and even though sometimes those things are the easiest thing to do, getting on social media all the time, jumping down the YouTube rabbit hole and watching a million videos, even though those are the easy things to do, they don't bring much satisfaction, and I usually feel worse afterwards after doing them, as opposed to when I do something that is hard for me but brings a lot of satisfaction. Making games, that is something that feels really good, and it's such a stark contrast that one could never be mistaken for the other.
Well, I think that's an excellent place to end. Thank you so much for talking with me, Benjamin. Um, I look forward to when I get to interview you on this podcast again down the road. And yeah, I'm excited for when this podcast comes out so everyone can hear this conversation. I think we had a really good discussion about productivity, about creativity, doing what you want, doing what you love, um, designing your environment. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Caleb. Talk with you later.
Yep.